Welcome to The Gut Show. I'm your host, Erin Judge, registered dietitian and founder of Gemelli. I'm also your fellow IBS warrior. Our goal on this side of the internet is to empower those with IBS and digestive disorders to understand their gut better, to have a healthier relationship with their bodies, and to make confident choices to improve their digestive health. During this season, you can expect a conversation around a hot topic related to gut health, digestion, and IBS. As a disclaimer, I am a dietitian, but I am not your dietitian. So everything covered in this episode is meant to be educational and is purely information that you can take back to your healthcare team in order to make the best decisions for you. If you're new here and something just doesn't feel right in your gut, if your symptoms have led you to this podcast, I invite you to start by taking the quiz, What's Your Poop Personality? Your personality type will unveil what your symptoms may mean, what may be causing them, and what you can do about them. This is a free quiz and you can take it today at getelevate.com or find the direct link below in the show notes. While you're going to take the quiz, let's jump into today's episode. Now for a quick word from our sponsors with resources that might support you.
Is a gluten-free diet just not cutting it, or maybe not even necessary when it comes to chronic symptoms like bloating, gas, and pain? Research actually shows that in those without celiac disease, it's actually the FODMAP, the carbohydrate, fructan in wheat, not gluten, that causes symptoms most often. This means that you may not need a strict gluten-free diet to see symptom relief. And it means that if you are reacting to fructans, there may be more foods in your diet beyond wheat that are causing you symptoms. This includes foods like garlic and onion, and even some fruits and vegetables that can sneak their way into your diet and contribute to those chronic symptoms. So you can choose to limit these foods and reduce your overall fructan intake in order to avoid symptoms. You also have the option to break the fructan down using FODzyme, an enzyme blend that targets fructan, lactose, and GOS FODMAPs, and that will help you break these FODMAPs down to then prevent the symptoms. Learn more about FODzyme in the show notes, and you can use the code THEGUTSHOW for 20% off your first order. Did you know that you can now order your own gut health tests without waiting months for a doctor's appointment? Gemelli Biotech offers trusted, science-backed, at-home tests for conditions like SIBO, EMO, ISO, and post-infectious IBS. Their Trio-Smart breath test measures the 3 key gases, hydrogen, methane, and hydrogen sulfide, to detect different forms of microbial overgrowth. As for those with IBS symptoms, IBS-Smart is a simple blood test that can confirm post-infectious IBS with clinical accuracy. Validated by the leaders in gut health, these are tests that you can trust and tests that you can take comfortably from your home. So go to getgutanswers.com to find out which tests are right for you and use the code ErinJudge25, all one word, ErinJudge25, to save $25 on your order.
And now let's get back to the show. Welcome back to The Gut Show. I'm your host, Erin Judge. I am here alone today, and I want to talk about a topic that we've covered some, but I want to condense it into one episode because I get asked about this every single day. Every client I work with has this as a top complaint. It is the most common GI complaint that exists, especially among women, also among other individuals, and that is bloating. So what causes it? What's going on when you are bloated? What even is it? And how do you actually fix it? So we're going to get into as much of the nitty-gritty as we can. As we start, I do want to just talk about what bloating actually is and what it may not be. The key here and what can be so frustrating with this symptom is that it's really not specific, meaning we can actually clarify and we can nail down what constipation is. We can look at how frequently you go, how long it takes you to go. We can look at the consistency of your bowel movements and see, okay, do we label this as clear constipation or diarrhea? And it's not perfect, but at least there's some sort of characteristic that we can look at and say, like, this specifically is this symptom. However, when it comes to bloating, it's a lot more of what you feel. It can be very subjective, and truly bloating itself is simply a feeling. The symptom is how you feel more than it is something that we can actually measure or be able to put a clear characteristic around. So when we talk about bloating, bloating is the feeling of fullness, heaviness, or discomfort. So typically it's going to be that feeling of fullness. Typically it's going to be kind of lower, like a feeling of this low fullness, like you're going to pop kind of feeling, right? Just the sensation itself. Now, distension also presents in some with bloating, and distension is typically what people mean when they are discussing their bloat. And that is where there's an actual change of abdominal girth or the size of your abdomen. So that's where the belly actually expands. So you feel full, you feel that feeling that things are just going to pop or explode, but you also have that distension, that change that then looks like a balloon that's been blown up and like it's going to pop. So, whenever you do talk about distension, it is important to say bloating with distension and showcase that specific characteristic because that is something that can be measured. And whether or not you are distended with your bloat and that feeling of fullness can help identify some of the cause of what's going on. What's also really tricky when we start getting into the causes of bloat is that bloating can present with a large amount of conditions and concerns. And this can be so frustrating because when you look at any GI condition, or if you went to WebMD or now we have ChatGPT and you put in there that you're bloated, it's probably going to give you a wide range of things, or it might throw some random thing in there and it may not be that, right? Because bloating can present with almost every single GI condition that is out there. Bloating can also present with gynecological conditions like PCOS and endometriosis. It can present in a lot of different ways. And so it's important to look at other symptoms in addition to your bloating when you are trying to identify what might be causing it or contributing to it and triggering the symptom itself. For some people, it can simply be as simple as environmental, what you eat, what you do, kind of your daily behaviors. For others, it may not be within their control or in their own choices, but maybe due to a condition, their physiology, medical history, different things that are going on. So let's get into some of the most common causes and talk through them to see if these resonate with you if you are struggling with bloat and bloating. So I'm going to talk about one that is what I call like the most surface level cause, and it is overeating or inconsistent meal patterns and binge type patterns. So not just binge eating disorder like with an eating disorder, but if you are eating a large amount of food in every single meal, if you eat very fast and you eat a large amount of food all at once, especially very heavy, dense foods like fried foods, heavy fat foods, ultra processed foods that are going to be a little bit more dense in terms of like high caloric load in a small amount of time. Or if you're skipping meals during the day, if you're someone who just gets distracted, my husband's this way, and when he's working, he just gets distracted, doesn't eat, not even by choice. Or if you are avoiding meals due to whatever reason there you may have, and then you eat a large amount within a smaller period of time, that can cause bloat. And that can be a bloat if you're doing this frequently. So if that's kind of your norm, you're eating heavy foods all the time, that can cause that persistent, consistent bloat. That also may cause those kind of short-term periods of bloating after meals. And so eating fast, eating a large amount at one time, all of that can be a very kind of surface level cause of that feeling of fullness. Now, typically with this cause, you're not going to see so much distension as you will with some of our other causes, unless there's other layers to it in terms of like what you're eating and all of that. But you may see short-term distension, especially with more of those, again, kind of binge type behaviors. You may see that distension, which is some normal after meals, but can happen after a very large meal. And then when that distension goes back down as food kind of makes its way through your digestive system, that resolves. And so there may be like a distension after meals that then resolves, but can be due to that behavior. So when we're starting to focus on bloating, we talk a lot about chewing well, listening to fullness cues, spreading meals out, eating consistently. All of those behaviors are so vital and important because of this cause that can commonly happen due to how you're eating, what you're eating. And it's not just as simple as like, quote unquote, eat healthier. It's about, yes, what you're eating and the balance of your meals. It's also about how much at one time, the overall patterns, and how you're eating in terms of how you're chewing, how fast you're eating, how you're tuning into your body as you are eating. That is really key. So if your doctor's said anything, and usually this comes up when weight is a part of the picture, and that's something we're not really going to get into, but that can be tricky too if you've gained weight or if you do hold a large amount of visceral fat in the abdomen, which is that kind of deeper level fat that can be risky in terms of its effect on organs. And when we look at like cardiovascular risk and things like that, and that's regardless of weight, but visceral fat can be present no matter what your weight is. So it's not just about weight itself, but when your weight is either increasing between like doctor's visits, or if it's considered to be high based on like a scale, like a BMI scale, they may talk to you about this, but just simply saying like, eat healthier, lose weight, that's not necessarily going to solve the problem. If it is behavioral of like what you're doing, the problem may not be resolved in and of itself. With that, how do you differentiate gaining weight and bloat? That is a really tricky one. And I would say, with bloat, sometimes, and especially getting into some more of our causes as we're going to talk through, sometimes that excess gas, excess stool burden, that water being pulled into the gut, that might shift your weight slightly. But you may see more fluctuations in weight, like it going up and going down. But if you are seeing like your weight go up and then it's not as much like dramatic distension, it's almost like a gradual bloating, uncomfortable feeling, that could be more tied to weight gain versus bloat itself. But that's really tricky because even if we got into what causes weight gain and fat accumulation, there's a lot of layers to that too. We could have an entire episode on that. And all of those can overlap a lot with what we see when it comes to bloating. So they can coexist. But that's another piece that I know can be tricky to navigate. I've had clients navigating that either because they wanted to gain weight back due to loss, or they're dealing with a few things that they're trying to work through, and there is some weight gain, and not understanding, okay, am I just gaining weight or am I actually bloated? Like, I really don't know. Sometimes people do chase the bloating pathway and like really restrict themselves and go on restrictive diets and try all these supplements when it is actually weight gain. And maybe we need to be looking beneath the surface of that, or kind of thinking about that instead of chasing the bloat, because that may not be resolved with the same strategy. So just another thing to consider when we're thinking about sort of this cause and truly identifying bloat as it is. So what is the actual top cause of bloating, especially in our GI population? So if there's a lot of GI complaints, what is the number one cause? That is constipation. And we joke about this a lot. I've done this with on social media as dietitians. We harp on this all the time, is always check constipation, or resolve constipation first before you go into more intensive strategies for bloating, because constipation can be a cause so often and the majority of the time. So why does this happen? So when it comes to that sensation itself, and if you're watching this on YouTube, I've got my little colon pillow to give you an example of this. But at the end of your colon, on this left side of your body, you have your rectum, which stores your stool, your poop. So you're not just pooping all the time, right? It's stored until we're ready to poop, and then everything exits out of the anal sphincter, which is connected to the colon, which is where that rectum is, right? So whenever your rectum is full of stool, you may feel, especially if you have visceral hypersensitivity, and we'll get into that later, but you may feel more of that sensation of fullness, right? Because there is stool backed up. Now, a normal amount of stool backed up, like your gut and your rectum is meant to accommodate that. It's meant to feel that. Like you may feel that sensation of needing to go, needing to poop. That's normal. It's the whole point. But for most people, just having a normal amount of poop backed up is not a big deal because you will release it. Some people, maybe at the end of the day, you notice that, or right before you poop, you may notice that. So it kind of comes and goes. But if you are having a large amount of stool burden, meaning you're really not pooping well, and you could be pooping every day and this can happen, right? So it's not just like constipation as we may think of it, as you're never pooping or anything, but you may have stool backing up throughout the entire colon, stretching that colonic muscle, and that's going to lead to more of that symptom of fullness and discomfort because you are actually full of stool and poop. That also can cause the weight piece, right? If you're like, oh, well, I've gained like 3 pounds in a day, what's going on? Sometimes that can be due to the poop that's backing up, which is really interesting. What also can happen when you have poop backed up is in your colon, you have the majority of your gut microbes. And your microbes, they feed on what we eat. They also feed on the waste in your poop, and they produce gas, right? And beneficial things if they're beneficial, not so beneficial things if they're not, but gas is often produced. So if you have a bunch of poop backed up in your colon, that is like a buffet, like an all you can eat buffet at all times for your gut microbes. So you may have more gas being produced. You may also have a bit of a blockage from gas being released. And so you may have more gas buildup. Gas buildup in your gut is going to stretch that abdominal muscle, and that will cause you to feel more full. So, what is visceral hypersensitivity? As I mentioned before, for some people, especially those who have IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, we know that this is present. This can be present in other conditions and in other people as well. We see this in people who deal with a lot of like pain related conditions. So endometriosis, you may have this. If you have like fibromyalgia, that's a very common overlap. But visceral hypersensitivity is where the nerve endings in your gut specifically, as we're talking about it, they're kind of taking in the sensations, right? Nerves just sort of take in sensations and then communicate those to the brain. The pain responsive regions of the brain are altered. We don't quite know why, but they send out pain and more significant reactions. So it's not that the sensation itself is different than maybe someone else is experiencing. Like it could be with like that poop buildup, the gas buildup, all of that. But one person without visceral hypersensitivity may not notice it that much. Someone with visceral hypersensitivity, they are going to feel that pain, feel that discomfort, feel that sensation. And if you have visceral hypersensitivity and you're also constantly thinking about it, looking for it, logging it, like if you're hyper aware of it as well, that's alerting the brain to be even more reactive and more responsive, which means you are going to feel that sensation of bloating more significantly, which is where a lot of like gut brain therapies fit in, and can be very effective even for bloating. Even sort of distracting yourself can be really effective, things like that. So whenever you have that gas buildup, that poop back up, you are going to feel it more if you have visceral hypersensitivity, and you are going to feel bloated. You also may experience that distension because as gas is building up and that colon is stretching, that's going to lead to the abdomen kind of stretching out more and more and more until you're able to pass the gas, pass the stool, everything moves through. That is one like kind of warning sign, I guess you could look at with constipation being the cause, is if when you poop or when some gas is released, like that you feel a lot better and it improves. And it's almost like you could eat something one day when you've pooped well and you do great with it. Whenever you may eat something another day where you just didn't poop as much, and now you have a lot of symptoms. Like that can be a sign that constipation is actually the cause. You can test for this, especially if you are pooping every day and you're like, I don't know if I'm backed up. Like, I don't think I'm constipated, but I'm not sure. You can ask your doctor for a KUB x ray. And it's just an imaging where they can look at the colon and see how much stool is there. And sometimes it is extreme and you may not know it at all. And that gives you a clue of what to focus on, which is resolve the constipation. That is the number one thing I assess and start working on with a client that is bloated way before we get into dietary restrictions and any of that stuff, or even supplements for the bloat, unless it's really just short-term relief. We really do hone in on constipation and make sure you're pooping well, you're emptying fully, and that is in a good spot. Gut motility is in a good spot before we chase any other kind of rabbit trail, because you may hit a wall over and over and over again if constipation is the main cause. You also could save yourself a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of supplement use by focusing on the constipation first. So if it's not constipation and or maybe you resolve the constipation and it's not improved, what else could be going on? Another common cause, especially when we're thinking about distension, is bacterial overgrowth. And this is something we've talked about in the last 5 to 10 years under the SIBO umbrella. So SIBO is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Now that umbrella has kind of expanded where we have ISO and EMO. ISO is intestinal sulfide overgrowth, sulfide, hydrogen sulfide producers. And then we have EMO, which is intestinal methanogen overgrowth, and they produce methane. So EMO is correlated with constipation. ISO is correlated with diarrhea. We have a full episode on this with Dr. Mark Pimentel. That was I think our first episode of the season. So go back to that if you want to dig into all of the what this is and everything. But with these pathogens, with these microbes, they produce way more gas. So if they're overgrown, whether it be in the small intestine or the large intestine, if they're producing a lot more gas than normal, then that is going to cause more of that distension, more of that discomfort, right? And it can be from very healthy foods, very good foods. And this is something that sometimes can just progress out of nowhere. It can feel like you were fine. And then all of a sudden it's like, I look pregnant by the end of the day, and it just seems to come out of nowhere. Sometimes that can be related to this bacterial overgrowth, which then could have been linked to a gut infection, foodborne illness, a viral infection, might be linked to a surgery or even chronic antibiotic use or different things like that. And so if you have that in your history over the last year or so, this is starting, like sometimes that can be the reason why, and that would be something to assess. One of our partners of the podcast, Trio Smart by Gemelli, they sell a test that lets you test for this. So we have a code on that. You see that in the ad. But that's the most validated test to look at all three of those gases. So you can actually test for this, and there are some treatments available. The treatments aren't the best. Again, review that Mark Pimentel episode. We need better treatments, but it is still something that you can address, and it can help make sense of why that bloating is present. And again, that can overlap with the constipation. I usually try to address the constipation first, then assess this, and then address it, because you're going to have a little bit more success with addressing it by addressing the constipation first. But there are some strategies that you can use in order to treat that overgrowth and then prevent the bloating from the overgrowth. But that can definitely happen. Pregnant belly by the end of the day, usually flat in the morning, and then some other signs that can show up with that can be a major cause. So I did talk about constipation as a cause. Another common cause is slow gut motility. And I want to talk about a few reasons why this can happen. But whenever we talk about constipation, often we're looking at this colon and we're looking at the rectum and the stool that's backed up, not being able to clear out. So it's more colonic motility and like lower colonic motility. Something else that can happen with the presentation of constipation or without constipation, meaning you could poop an empty grate. But something else that can be problematic for bloating is slow gut motility, either in the small intestine and also in the majority of the large intestine. And it's not just that poop can't clear, but it's that things are not moving efficiently throughout the GI tract. And where this fits in with bloating is that gas, normal gas that's produced while you're eating food, which is great. Also, the food itself, being able to kind of move through and pass through, that can sort of build up in certain pieces of the intestine whenever things aren't moving efficiently. That sluggishness can feel like bloating. That can also just lead to that kind of trapped gas feeling that can present with bloating and some of that distension you may see. And this, if it overlaps with stool backup too, like it can be really problematic and often linked and correlated. So that can be another symptom. Usually that's like, okay, I get really full while I'm eating and it's like, oh, I just feel miserable. Like I feel sluggish, like a brick is in my stomach and things are just not moving after meals. Sometimes that can be related to slow gut motility. Now, some people have just slow motility. We see this with IBS-C. We can see this with, medication abuse in the past, like laxative abuse. This can happen. Opioid abuse in the past. This can happen. We can see this after the presence of eating disorders, especially anorexia, but high levels of restrictive eating. Sometimes that improves, sometimes this does not, and it may remain. We see this in certain people who have longer guts, especially with a lot of women tend to have longer colons. And if there's more surface area to move through, sometimes that can cause things to move a bit more slow. We also can see this if you have scar tissue or adhesions. This may be especially true in like the endometriosis population, or if you've had abdominal surgery in any way. That can include if you've had a C-section, if you've had a hysterectomy, any types of surgeries throughout the abdominal cavity can then lead to scar tissue or adhesions. Trauma to the abdomen, if you got into a car wreck and there was something there, or blunt force trauma into your abdomen, that could cause slow gut motility. Nerve issues can cause this, which again sometimes can be related to injury due to like inflammation in the gut. We can see that with like celiac disease that had not been managed well, with IBD, with chronic infections, or you had C. diff or something like that, right? There's a lot of reasons why there can be kind of a slower motility presentation. And sometimes this may be temporary as your gut is kind of healing and resolving. Sometimes this may be chronic and long term. And sometimes we may not fully understand why this is happening. And that can be true of like connective tissue disorders, like Ehlers-Danlos syndromes and like hypermobility and things like that, that we may see this present since childhood. So this can be present in a lot of people and definitely can contribute to bloating. A little harder to fix. Like we definitely treat the constipation if it's present, and that does help a lot. Really working on those meal behaviors of chewing really well, maybe utilizing things like ginger, warm liquids, movement can help a lot with like getting blood flow to the gut. Abdominal massage can be helpful. Maybe adjusting like meals in the particle size, so making them a bit easier to digest. That doesn't mean low fiber, but it may mean more soluble fibers over insoluble fibers, more cooked down foods, maybe some like blended, really mushy foods, like that may move a little bit easier. Smaller meals more frequently for some may do well. Larger meals with some spacing between for some may do well. So there's a lot of different creative strategies we can use. There are also medications out there that do address this. And for some people that may be necessary, again, based on history or the pathophysiology of what's happening in the body. But this can be very common. This can sort of be tested. You can test transit time of like your stomach emptying, how things move through the small intestine, the large intestine. It's not a perfect test and it can alter every time you take it. And so I haven't found many people get great answers from it. And so it does exist. Your doctor can do it. You can ask about it, but it doesn't necessarily give you a lot of insight every time, nor does it really tell you what to do in terms of treatment. Like you kind of treat it the same way if you feel the symptoms. So it is a little bit of a trickier one, but it does exist and it can be a big piece of the puzzle. One thing that can be fixed is if it is scar tissue or adhesions, there can be some treatments to clear that out, and that can be helpful. With nerve damage, I think that's something that's being looked at a little bit more. Maybe in the future we'll have more treatments for that. But like that may be something where even therapies around that might be helpful. So there's some potential. Like in the future, I think we're going to see a little bit of a better focus on this. Another big cause, and we sort of talked about this at the beginning, but diet, what you eat, how you eat, can cause bloating for sure. And there are a few different components to that. So the first one is not really related to like sensitivities and intolerances and personalization, just simply high fat foods. Fats can be incredible. Like we don't want to all go on low fat diets. That is not where I'm going with this. But fats are more calorically dense, meaning there's more calories, more energy, more things in the per gram of fat that you eat that need to be broken down to be absorbed and used by the body. So whenever you have fats that enter your small intestine, where a lot of our absorption takes place, the small intestine has this mechanism called the ileocecal break between the small intestine and the large intestine, and it literally breaks. So it kind of closes off that valve to slow digestion in the small intestine in order to break those fats down properly. So if you have a lot of fats coming in, and this is just normal, what can happen, right? Your body may actually slow things down to really break those fats down. And that can cause that sluggishness, bloating, discomfort that you may feel. These are also very heavy foods, and they can feel heavy in the stomach and in the gut early on after you eat them. And so that can be problematic. What can also happen with fats is the not so helpful fats. So when we look at plant-based fats like our olive oil, nuts and seeds, or our fish fats that have omega-3 fatty acids like salmon and tuna, those are very protective, supportive, and have been associated with positive gut health, meaning more balanced gut microbiome, better intestinal permeability, and the strength of the intestinal wall, less inflammation, all those good things. Saturated fats found in most animal foods have been associated with the opposite and really more in the balance. So you don't need to be a vegetarian or pescatarian, but if you're eating a large amount of saturated fats, and also if you're eating a large amount of very highly processed fats like trans fats that aren't animal or plant derived, but they're more chemically like made, right? They're made in terms of processing of food for palatability and things like that. Those have been associated with the negative gut health markers, like a less balanced gut microbiome, more intestinal permeability, more inflammation in the gut, more problems, right? And so that can cause a problem short term with how it impacts gut motility, but it can also cause a problem in the long term because if you do have a very unhealthy gut microbiome, if you have more intestinal permeability or that leakiness of the gut, water gets pulled into the gut more frequently, like there's more reactions that can happen. All of that can contribute to more consistent, persistent bloat and that visceral hypersensitivity. So something to be considerate of. Now for a quick word from our sponsors with resources that might support you. Are you struggling with bloating, constipation, or diarrhea, and you're still waiting to see your doctor?
Take control and get answers with Gemelli Biotech's at-home gut health tests.
The Trio Smart Breath Test is the only at-home test that is validated to look for all three gases that are associated with microbial overgrowth: hydrogen, methane, and hydrogen sulfide. That means it can detect SIBO, EMO, and ISO in one simple test. It ships right to your door, no appointment needed. You take it and you send it back, then you get answers. If your IBS symptoms started after a stomach bug or food poisoning, it could be post-infectious IBS. The IBS-Smart blood test is a quick at-home test to help identify it. Fun fact, 1 in 9 people who get food poisoning will end up with post-infectious IBS, and most don't even know they have it.
With both of Gemelli Biotech's tests,
you'll get clinically backed results in about a week, and you can take them straight to your provider. No waiting, no referrals, just answers. Find out which tests are right for you at getgutanswers.com and use the code AaronJudge25, all one word, AaronJudge25, to save $25 on your order. You can also find all these details in your show notes.
Are you taking a prescription medicine for irritable bowel syndrome with constipation, or IBS-C? If symptoms like constipation, belly pain, and bloating are still bothering you, it may be time to try something different. Ibsrela, tenapanor, is a prescription medicine used to treat adults with IBS-C. Ibsrela works differently to relieve the symptoms of IBS-C so that you can focus on what's important to you. Ask your doctor if Ibsrela could be right for you. Do not give Ibsrela to children less than 6 years of age. You should not give Ibsrela to children 6 to less than 18 years. It may harm them. The most common side effect is diarrhea, sometimes severe, and your child could get severe dehydration. Stop taking Ibsrela and call your doctor if you develop severe diarrhea. Do not take Ibsrela if you have a bowel blockage. Tell your doctor if you are pregnant or breastfeeding and about the medicines you take. Other common side effects include swelling or a feeling of fullness or pressure in your abdomen, gas, or dizziness. Learn more at ibsrela.com/PI or call 1-844-IBSRELA and press option 4. Ready to try something different for your IBS-C symptoms? Ask your doctor about Ibsrela.
As someone with IBS-C, I've struggled with symptoms related to food for the majority of my life, specifically FODMAPs. My personal triggers, beans, dairy products, garlic, and onion, would leave me feeling bloated and uncomfortable after meals, especially whenever I was eating out or traveling or living my life outside of my home, which meant I either had to just deal with the symptoms or eat bland, awful food and miss out on experiencing the social interactions and the joy of food. Finding FODzyme was a game changer for me. This is an enzyme blend that targets FODMAPs, specifically the GOS that's found in beans, fructan in the garlic, onion, wheat, and even different fruits and vegetables, as well as lactose in dairy products. I stash this in my wallet, my husband's wallet, every bag I own. I take it with me everywhere I go so that I can simply sprinkle it on my meals, eat with confidence, and feel my best after. If you want to try FODzyme for yourself, go to fodzyme.com and don't forget to use the code THEGUTSHOW, all one word, THEGUTSHOW, for 20% off your first order.
And now let's get back to the show. Now, outside of that, fibers. Fiber feeds microbes and causes gas. Fiber is also necessary to feed beneficial gut microbes to have that healthy gut microbiome and healthy gut environment that we just talked about. So healthy fats are part of it. You also have to have fiber. So that balance is really important. But if you are eating inconsistent fiber, so some days very low, some days very high, that gas buildup is going to be pretty strong. If you're not eating any fiber, you may have unhealthy gut microbes that aren't doing so well, and you may actually have more bloating. If you are eating a large amount of fiber, too much fiber, or you increased your fiber too fast, right? Went from 0 to 100, just boom, increased your fiber a ton. You are going to have more gas buildup. You're going to have more bloating. So when it comes to fiber, we want fiber to increase for most people. The majority, especially Americans, where I'm present, right? The majority of Americans are not meeting their dietary fiber recommendations, which is 20 to 25 grams for females, about 35 to 40 grams for males. Now, we want you to increase your fiber slowly, let your body adjust, improve it, cook those foods down, and tolerate them well. If you are getting 50, 60 grams of fiber because you've fed into the belief that, well, more is better, some populations cannot handle that amount of fiber. And if your gut is longer, it's more windy, it moves slower, that is a lot of fiber to move through your gut. More fiber means more poop. More fiber means more gas. If you are not processing that well, you are going to be more bloated and be more uncomfortable. So more may not be better. You actually may benefit from a reduction in just the overall balance of your meals. And that can be a really hard one to navigate because we do want to prioritize fiber. Do not go on a low fiber diet. That is not sustainable and that will work against your gut health down the road. That's a short-term benefit, right? We don't want to do that. But for some people, a reduction in fiber can still be very healthy, still prioritize longevity and outcomes that they want, and help with the symptoms that they're experiencing. So make sure that you're looking at that. And if you did recently increase your fiber, you've been eating healthier. I see this a lot around the start of the year where people do like a Whole30 diet or something like that. And that just drastic change. Or on the fat side, people who go to like a keto diet, they start having all these symptoms. Sometimes it's because they did too much too fast or the balance overall has shifted and it's causing problems. So we just need to modify a few things, give the body time to adjust, which can then prevent that bloating that you feel. Now, when it comes to diet, there are also some intolerances that can happen that can contribute to bloat for individuals, and this is more personalized. So one of them is lactose intolerance, and that is a malabsorption of lactose because of not producing enough enzyme to break the lactose down. Another one is fat malabsorption, where like bile may not be working properly, but you're malabsorbing fats. There's also kind of a more broad pancreatic enzyme insufficiency where you're just lacking a lot of enzymes. So there's more of a broad malabsorption of foods. There can also be sucrose malabsorption, which is a sugar malabsorption, maltose malabsorption, which is a starch malabsorption, fructose malabsorption, which is the fruit sugars or in fructose. So all of these malabsorptive conditions, what happens is in the small intestine where those foods and those particles should all be breaking down and being absorbed in the body, that doesn't happen. And so they make their way into the colon malabsorbed, right? Should have been broken down. They didn't get broken down. They go into the colon. The colon is not meant to break these particles down. Often they're too big for the colon. And what this can do is either feed gut microbes too much things that they're not really supposed to be eating. And then there's a lot of gas. So that can happen. What also can happen is because these particles are too big, they should have been broken down, water will pull into the gut. And that can cause diarrhea for some, but that can also cause water in the colon, which can expand and stretch out the colon just like gas, right? There's more volume coming in. And so that can cause bloating and discomfort. Some of these things can be tested for, which is great. So you can always ask your doctor for certain malabsorptive tests. As a dietitian, this is something we assess for with diet of like what commonly causes symptoms. Usually there's going to be a presence of diarrhea, bloating, cramping, pain, and it's usually an hour, a few hours after the intake of these foods. And so we can see patterns that then hint to this, and we might do a specific elimination reintroduction diet, maybe confirm with testing, and that can be one way to assess that bloating that you feel, but that can be common. Another one that's not necessarily malabsorptive, but that would be a FODMAP sensitivity. So for those with visceral hypersensitivity, this is more often related. Those without that, this may not be, but we see this a lot in those with bacterial overgrowth, likely because it overlaps a lot with IBS, and this is a hallmark of IBS. This also may be present in other conditions, inflammatory conditions. We may see this with those autoimmune conditions, again, where hypersensitivity may be at play. FODMAPs are certain carbohydrates that most people malabsorb. Some of them have fibers like fructans and galacto-oligosaccharides that as humans, we just don't really break down. So they're meant to go into the colon. They have prebiotic effects. They feed gut microbes. And some of them, their size is just really small. And they kind of make their way into the gut, and they can impact gut permeability, and they kind of leak in and out because of their particle size. So these are not things that, we can test for an enzyme deficiency besides lactose, which is a FODMAP, but the other FODMAPs, it's not so much that you're lacking something and then we give you, that. It's not so much that there's a blood test we can do to tell us that you have a FODMAP intolerance. But if you are sensitive to the sensations in the gut of that gas buildup, water coming into the gut due to the size of these particles and how they're interacting in the colon, then you may experience bloating related to these foods. And in those cases, a low FODMAP diet, or maybe enzymes that help with the breakdown. Again, you're not lacking those enzymes necessarily, but in this way, they can help kind of support that more and like break these down more so that they don't cause problems, like FODzyme, one of our partners. But that can be a way to address the bloating from those foods. And this is something, again, as a dietitian, we can look for in your diet. Do you eat these foods? Are you dealing with the bloating after meals and other discomfort after meals? Pain can be a big one for people with a FODMAP sensitivity. And so we may utilize a version of a low FODMAP diet, maybe a modification, just simply reducing load. And that all can reduce the bloating that you feel, or again, utilizing the enzyme FODzyme. So all of that can play a role. I did talk a little bit about how you eat already, but I do want to get into some specifics of like what you can do about it. So one of them is chewing well. Digestion does start in your mouth, especially digestion of carbohydrates and starches, which tend to be some of those foods that again cause more of that bloat, that gas buildup and all those things, right? And so making sure that you have saliva production, you're chewing well, saliva is being produced. Chewing to applesauce consistency can be big. Not eating too fast, which chewing will help you with that, and then tuning into those fullness cues, as I mentioned earlier. Your posture. Something that can happen whenever you are dealing with bloat is if you are slumped over. So just do that with me right now, where you just kind of slump your shoulders forward. You're going to be crunching into your abdomen. You're probably going to feel a bit of discomfort. Now imagine food trying to move through there. Like there is a bit of a gravity anatomy component to that, right? If you're squishing your abdomen, if you're wearing really, really tight pants, even that are just squishing and squeezing your abdomen, that normal amount of distension you should be feeling after meals might be very uncomfortable. Gas may not be able to move. In some cases, you may be interfering with your motility because you're pushing on all of those muscles that are trying to work. And so that can contribute to more bloating, and that can be something to fix. And if you are eating a meal very quickly, maybe working distracted, and then you're just like sitting all day, like there's no blood flow to the gut, right? That can cause you to feel more bloated. So getting up and moving your body gently, getting blood flow to the gut throughout the day can all help prevent bloating. So what are some other causes, right? These are some of the big ones, but what are some other sort of related to that anatomy, crunching of the abdomen piece? If you have poor muscle tone or a lack of proper rebound of your abdominal wall, meaning when your gut organs are naturally distending a bit, they have food moving through, there's gas buildup, typically your abdominal wall kind of rebounds against that to keep that distension from being so extreme. So sometimes the amount of gas, the amount of stool backup, that can make that rebound really useless. But in some people, it's not really about what's happening in the gut, but that rebound of their abdominal wall is just lacking. And that might be true of those with diastasis recti. It can be true, again, low muscle tone. And in cases of a condition called abdominophrenic dyssynergia, where those muscles are just not coordinating properly, this can happen. This is something that would be assessed by a physical therapist and addressed by a physical therapist. And again, some of the warning signs could be diastasis recti, that can be one, overall low muscle tone. And usually it's the presence of really significant distension. So a large amount of abdominal growth. You look pregnant, but really without the feeling of fullness, not really gassy, not really constipated. So it can feel kind of bizarre, but that is a common reason that can overlap with that. So it may look like bacterial overgrowth, and you may test to be negative, but you don't feel any other symptoms. It's literally just you have this weird distension that can be due to that abdominophrenic dyssynergia. This should change. So if you always have that distension, we want to get that assessed, right? There could be growths, tumors, things like that that are going on. But with abdominal phrenic dyssynergia, you're going to have a large amount of distension. And then as food moves through, that distension goes down. So it's almost like you eat anything and boom, your belly expands and you look pregnant and then it's gone before the next meal. That's what it will look like. And then another common cause are hormones, especially when we're getting into gynecological conditions and primarily like female reproductive hormones. So during different changes of your menstrual cycle, you will experience fluctuations of the hormones progesterone and estrogen as both of them rise and kind of the balance shifts. So with ovulation, pre-menstruation, there can be more bloating, and that can be even more pronounced if you have conditions like endometriosis or PCOS, or kind of an imbalance of hormones there. But that can be very common, which is why during that premenstrual phase, the end of the luteal phase, there is more bloating, and it tends to be a little bit more persistent and does tend to be related to that cycle versus like just related to food or just related to changes in bowel habits or anything like that. So this one is sometimes easier to identify if we're tracking the cycle. If you don't utilize birth control or things like that that interfere with the cycle, then we can track and see, okay, what is happening? And this is very common. In some ways, this is very normal. And again, in conditions where the body's reaction to these hormone fluctuations or the fluctuations may be more extreme or just imbalanced, this may be something that is more significant that we need to focus on more and address, and that would be addressing those conditions that are present. PCOS, we definitely see a lot more bloating, and there is a large amount of overlap with IBS. The same is true even of endometriosis, and so we might be addressing both the gynecological condition and the GI side of it all. And then when we're looking at things to do, I've talked about that throughout each cause, but it's also important to make sure that we work on the gut microbiome, because as I had mentioned with, a higher fat diet and even the role of fiber, if you have an imbalance of gut microbes, so more of a dysbiotic gut profile, if you have more intestinal permeability, if there's more low-grade inflammation in the gut, if the balance and the health of your gut overall is not in the best place, same is true of your metabolic health. If we're not processing food well, if there's insulin sensitivity, all of that can drive bloating and kind of contribute to more persistent, consistent symptoms. And so with all of the recommendations I've made, they're all very important. It's also important to focus on those things that can improve the gut microbiome. So a balanced diet, less saturated fats, more healthy fats, adequate fiber intake spread out throughout the day, fiber diversity. One thing we haven't talked a lot about is stress, but the really regulating stress and activating your parasympathetic rest and digest state as much as possible, balancing stress. Stress does not create a very healthy gut microbiome. And it's something that doesn't really make sense that should be connected, but it definitely is. And so that's going to be a big part of it. Getting enough sleep, all of that can be important. Social life and social health can also be very important related to the stress side of it. So all of those things in those daily healthy habits are going to be supportive, avoiding things that are going to be damaging, like again, highly processed foods, alcohol, drugs like smoking, certain medications, especially looking at like opioids that directly impact the gut, NSAIDs that can directly impact the gut lining, which then impact the health of the gut. All of that is going to be important. And then also being mindful of your supplements. So not just medications, but many supplements can also contribute to bloating and symptoms. Herbals, even those that are meant to treat bloating, sometimes probiotics can often be a cause. And so it's important to be mindful about the things that you're taking and what their side effects may be, and then have those discussions with your treatment team and those who've recommended things to you to make sure that what you're taking is actually supporting you. And if you need it and it causes side effects, then you know that you may need a little additional support for those side effects, or there might be a bit of acceptance with some of them that are necessary as part of your treatment of another condition. But don't overlook that. I see a lot of people who are taking a lot of supplements, eating a lot of foods like that, like these kind of health related foods that have a lot of sugar alcohols or have a lot of these really intense fibers like inulin or chicory root that can be more gas causing. A lot of that can cause you more persistent bloat, but be kind of masked as a healthy thing that you're doing. So you may not recognize them as a potential cause, but they definitely can be there, especially things like those prebiotic fiber sodas and things like that can kind of sneak up on you. I hope this was a helpful episode. I know bloating is a hot topic, and there's a lot of nitty gritty pieces to it and a lot of strategies to try, a lot of assessing that goes on. But hopefully this simplified some things. Hopefully some connections have been made for you. And if you did enjoy the episode, subscribe, leave a nice review, let me know. That's always helpful so that others can get this content as well. And then if you were interested in some of these causes, we've talked about some of these in episodes. We have the endometriosis episode from last week. We have our SIBO episode earlier on. I didn't really get into the immune side, but even looking at mast cells and how that works, like we've talked about that. So there's a lot of great episodes for you to go back and review in order to dig even deeper into these causes and put together a game plan with your healthcare team.
Are you listening to today's episode with the main thought being, what are the steps that I can take to get rid of my symptoms right now? While I hope that the information that we share in every episode of The Gut Show leaves you feeling more empowered and more confident in your body, it's not always going to solve your problem or give you a clear direction for your specific symptoms and your needs. The Master Method membership is an online program for the person with chronic digestive symptoms and IBS who wants step-by-step guidance to understand their body, address the drivers of IBS, reduce symptoms, and build resilience in your gut long-term. This membership includes a step-by-step course and a dietitian-led community that teaches you how to holistically address each symptom and the IBS drivers, how to reduce symptoms more strategically and with confidence, and guidelines for better gut health long-term so that you're not only thinking about today, but you're also improving your outcomes in the future. It is time to ditch the symptoms and get your life back. The membership is your first step. You can learn more and enroll at IBSmastermethod.com and use the code GUTSHOW, GUTSHOW, GUTSHOW for $25 off your enrollment fee.